Welcome to Awesome Movie Year, the podcast where we take a look back at an awesome year for movies, which is every year. My name is Josh Bell, film critic and writer, and I am joined by my co-host.
I'm Jason Harris, filmmaker, comedian, and this is a podcast of the round table. We record whenever we're able. We ate a fish, it was able. Don't give us a label.
Wow. Did you actually write some lyrics there to sing, Jason?
I mean, you know, Josh, anytime Dave's not the only Jewish rapper on this show.
Hey.
All right. What are we singing about in this episode? In this season of Awesome Movie Year, we are talking about the films of 1975, and we are here at our first feature episode, and we are looking at the directorial debut, the joint directorial debut of Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, which is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Of course, Gilliam and Jones are two members of the Monty Python comedy troupe, along with Graham Chapman, John Cleese, Eric Idle, and Michael Palin, all of whom co-wrote this film and co-star in it, playing multiple roles as they do on their sketch comedy show, Monty Python's Flying Circus, which this is sort of a spin-off from, I guess we could say.
Yeah, it's one of those things where, you know, a comedy group takes some of the things that they're best at and blows it out into higher volume, so to speak.
Yes. And this actually was, I think it was in between seasons of the TV show. So this is something where they were still at the height of kind of doing the sketch comedy show when they took a detour to make this film. It wasn't like post popularity or something like that. So this is really like, yeah, the height of their success as a comedy troupe, I think.
And Jones and Gilliam had never directed a movie. These guys, it just seems like it was one of those, hey, kids, let's put on a show. Whatever we can make, let's make. And it came out to be a wild success.
Yes. Yeah, they had previously put out a movie called And Now for Something Completely Different, which I was wondering about this, whether I had seen it before, because I hadn't realized what that is it's a collection of sketches from the TV show. But it's not just like a compilation. They redid all the sketches and shot them specifically as a movie without like the studio audience and the laugh track. And so I started wondering, like, some of these classic Monty Python sketches, did I see the original version or did I see the version that was created for that movie? And I really have no idea because it's been so long since I watched that stuff.
Right. It's funny to think like no one would ever do that now, but you know, this is the mid 70s. It's that type of access point, right? The theater experience, the communal experience. That was the big end all say all of watching something like this.
Right.
So what were some of your favorite sketches, Josh? You a child of the 70s.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I remember watching Monty Python on, I mean, I think it was on PBS here. And maybe by the time that was maybe in the 70s, and when we were growing up and were like teenagers, which was probably when I would have been interested in Monty Python, it was on maybe Comedy Central or something like that. So, I mean, of course, there's like the parrot sketch. That's a classic, and the Ministry of Silly Walks. You know, these are all very famous ones.
That one just makes me laugh out loud. You know,
yeah, and I haven't seen any of that stuff in a long time. I did notice when watching this movie that Netflix surprisingly has a lot of Monty Python content.
I watched a good amount.
Yeah, all right. So, but yeah, that is the thing, is that, you know, when they were just was airing on TV in the UK, and then in order to introduce it to an American audience, they actually made this movie, and that was seemingly, it seems inefficient, but that was the best way, or what they perceived as the best way to kind of bring those sketches to American viewers.
Well, they were so popular in Great Britain, right? Like when you look at like how they made this movie, and it's like, we asked Pink Floyd and Led Zeppelin to help fund it, and maybe Elton John or George Harrison or whoever, right? It's like they seem to have broken through in the zeitgeist at the time and just had access to whatever they wanted to do.
Right. Well, I mean, in part, the reason that they got rock groups and record companies to finance this film is because a movie studio would not. So they're popular, but in this certain like counterculture kind of realm. They're the rock band of comedy.
Yeah, right. And I think, you know, those guys, by funding those movies, didn't have to pay taxes that they otherwise would have had to.
Yes, and there's one thing we love, it's when rich people don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah, or when rock and rollers talk about taxation.
Yes. So this movie was successful. I kind of did some rough conversions here on figures that were in pounds from 1975. So this may not be 100%
All right.
accurate, but it looks like it grossed about $1.9 million on its budget of approximately $410,000. So not a huge hit or anything. But the other thing, of course, with this is that zeitgeist element, that maybe it didn't make a massive amount of money, but it achieved so much in awareness of Monty Python as an entity that it then fuels the further success of the TV show and their ability to make more movies later on.
And also, like, dude, this was playing constantly on TV when we were kids.
Yeah, and so that figure doesn't, I assume, include later like re-releases and all of that kind of stuff, where it still gets, I feel like it was not that long ago that there was another Fathom Events showing of this movie or whatever, where it probably brought in a bit more money, and it just keeps happening over and over again.
I mean, at the time of recording, they just had the coronation of King Charles this morning, right? So you could see them doing something like that just to celebrate that or whatnot.
Yes, indeed. The coronation of King Charles, almost as ridiculous as this movie.
Me.
Thank you. And it wasn't exactly a highly awarded film, but I did find it interesting. It was nominated for the 1976 Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. The Hugos are like science fiction and fantasy awards, so I guess they're saying that this is somehow a fantasy film.
Yeah, well, sure, why not? It's takes place in 932 AD, Josh, so it could be some type of fantastical event.
Yeah, I mean, the whole idea of,
it's got magic realism and
yes,
kind of surreal nature to it.
It does, yeah, and the whole idea of the Holy Grail and the sword and the stone and all the King Arthur myths is a frequent source material for fantasy stories. So it was not something that I would have expected necessarily.
Well, they're full of surprises, the Pythons and the Hugos.
They are indeed. So critics were mixed on this film and seemingly on Monty Python in general at the time, which is not surprising that like a goofy comedy troupe wasn't universally acclaimed by critics. But some of them were on the wavelength of this film. Vincent Canby in the New York Times was pretty positive. He said, Monty Python and the Holy Grail has some low spots, but anyone at all fond of the members of this brilliant British comedy group, which more or less justifies Sunday night television in New York, shouldn't care less. Monty Python and the Holy Grail is a marvelously particular kind of lunatic endeavor. It's been collectively written by the Python troupe and jointly directed by two of them, Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones, so effectively that I'm beginning to suspect that there really aren't six of them, but only one, a fellow with several dozen faces who knows a great deal about trick photography. The gags are non-stop, occasionally inspired, and should not be divulged, though it's not giving away too much to say that I particularly liked a sequence in which the knights, to gain access to an enemy castle, come up with the idea of building a Trojan rabbit.
So that is a funny thing where none of spoilers, guys. None of them actually are in the rabbit when it enters, so yes. It's a complete waste of time. So I like how they always like just undercut themselves that way. But I think Canby hits on a good point in that like their collective commitment and point of view is so crystallized. Like they're all so committed to each thing that it is a very clear, distinct, singular point of view through this collection.
Yeah, it is. And even though to varying degrees, these guys are famous on their own and we recognize them, especially I would think John Cleese and Eric Idle, who are the ones who went on to be the most famous like as performers, they really disappear into all of these different roles to the point where I feel like going online later and seeing which role each person played, I was still like, oh, right, he was that, because there's such variety to it and they are really just fully immersed in every one of these little parts.
And it's, in both this and Life of Brian, they give Graham Chapman the lead and he's so committed to those characters. It's really like, it sells the whole thing.
Yeah, and Chapman here, of course, plays King Arthur, who is, to summarize the plot, I guess, is rounding up various knights, just random people that he deems worthy, it seems like, and they form the Round Table, and they're going to go on a quest for the Holy Grail as deemed by God, who is a Terry Gilliam animation bit. And
Yeah, I mean, there was Sir Bedivere the Wise, Sir Lancelot the Brave, Sir Galahad the Pure, Sir Robin the not so quite brave as Sir Lancelot, or the not quite so brave. And I liked Sir not appearing in this film.
yes, which is a picture of a baby who is I believe, one of the children of one of the Monty Python members.
Yeah,
Just showing up. Yes, William Palin, the son of Michael Palin, shows up
Michael.
as a little baby.
It must have been fun to just say, Sir Robin, the not quite so brave as Sir Lancelot.
Yes, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. Clearly, they were having a very good time, even though there's challenges, and it was a low budget that they cobbled together from all those sources. Like, I feel like a lot of the things with these comedy troupes is you can tell when they're having fun and there's such camaraderie, and that comes across in the film. And I think there's a lot of that going on here.
I think you're right, Josh.
Thank you, Jason. So Stanley Kaufman in The New Republic had some backhanded compliments, kind of. He said, "Here is Monty Python and the Holy Grail, which is neither as sparkling as it is said to be, nor as bad as it seems to be at the start. But it's pretty good. Thus, as British phenomena go these days, exceptional. If you are watching Monty Python's Flying Circus, you have more than some idea of the kind of film this is, except that the film has fewer sags and is better photographed. Holy Grail is a series of skits on one general theme, so is disguised as an organic story. It too has hits and misses. When it hits, it makes some clear statements of national humor. Whatever their flops in other comic veins, film slapstick, for instance, the British have always excelled at the tease. Leg pull is the British term, and the pleasant glow of the leg pull, rather than the yock or boff, is the aim of Holy Grail. What's up for teasing here is the whole body of Arthurian legend, and the basic leg pull is of the sanctity of that legend and of British sanctimonious toward it."
Speaking of sanctimonious, what the fuck was that?
Yeah, I'm not really
Seriously.
I'm not sure what a yock or boff is really exactly here.
I mean, Josh, I think I've made a living in comedy for close to 20 years now. And I don't know I've never been like, gotten off stage or done a sketch and been like, great leg pull, but you could have done a little more yawking there or something like that.
Yeah, I don't understand exactly what the yawking and the boffing is, but I mean, I think the leg pull idea is, the idea, like, I think it's kind of what you were saying about the undercutting, right? It's the tease where they're showing you one thing and then kind of pulling your leg, about it or whatever, pulling the legs out from under it. I feel like is what it's doing, the pompousness of King Arthur, and then they deflate that. And that's, I believe, kind of what he's, there's more to this review, obviously, and I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I think that's kind of what he's getting at here.
Misdirects and subversion.
Yes.
And okay. All right. Well, I'll have to work on my yawks and boffs.
You do that. I did enjoy that. I mean, and I appreciated this, he's trying to offer a very serious analysis of this film. And Richard,
by making up words and
I mean,
just throwing them in there.
We don't know what British comedy scholars were talking about in 1975. Maybe he's right about it. So Richard Schickel in Time magazine also had some deeper analysis. He said, "King Arthur, as London's Monty Python troupe imagines him, is really an awful, sensible, decent chap. Played by Graham Chapman, he is the kind of tweedy fellow who should be sitting on the Tory party backbench in modern Britain, rather than running around 6th century England forming round tables and looking for holy grails. Arthur's adventures reach no logical conclusion. They are simply brought to an abrupt end when a police car rolls up and the entire round table is rounded up. This is a key image in the film, which pats down the entire chivalric tradition for bloody and dangerous residual ideas. Along with the high comedy, this determined insistence on the gory stupidity of ancient but still potent fantasy is what holds the film together. Grail is as funny as a movie can get, but it is also a tough-minded picture, as outraged about the human propensity for violence as it is outrageous in its attack on that propensity."
Well, that's interesting because if you watch this on Life of Brian, they definitely they don't play favorites when it comes to killing characters off, and they just you know throw them away and just have such a willy nilly attitude, so I get that. Like it's just like we're playing with the form of it and just how little life maybe meant to higher classes or religious zealots at certain points in time.
Right. Yeah, I feel like there's less, you maybe have to strain a little to find the social commentary in this film more so than in Life of Brian, which I have seen, but not recently. I know you watched that a lot more recently, but it seemed like that was a bit more pointed in its critiques, like of religion and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, I think you get some of that here where, like when Lancelot goes in and saves the other knight from all the siren women and just starts murdering them and no, I want to stay, and he just keeps killing all of them. So it's but honestly, even if there's no social critique on anything, funny is funny, so who cares, right?
Right. Well, yeah, and I think this is a movie that is more, maybe more so than Life of Brian, just focused on this nonstop barrage of gags and jokes, and that's the idea that the story doesn't. There's not really much of a plot. It doesn't really hold together, but it doesn't really matter whether it holds together.
Yeah, I think that actually it works to the advantage, the chaos of the whole thing, and just like we keep using the word undercutting, but like every time they get close, there's another thing that stops them. And I know they all decided like he should never find it, and I think they did a great job of playing with the form of film, where you're cutting to these modern things, or there's animation, and just all these just kind of sidewinding roads that take them off the course really work well here.
Right. And I think, I can't remember which one, but I think there was a quote from at least one of them who said that he was disappointed with how the ending of this film went. And I mean, as Richard Schickel, honestly, there's more in that review where he basically just describes the entire ending, which I always find amazing in these old film reviews where they just straight up give the entire plot all the way through to the end of the film and nobody cared. And now that would be like, you'd get crucified to use a Life of
That's
Brian
the wrong
reference.
movie. Yeah,
Right,
exactly.
exactly. But the idea that basically like the movie ends with this just very abrupt anticlimax, and then they cut to black, and there's not even any end credits. They're just playing this like kind of jaunty organ music over the black screen for like 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's funny. It's again, you're playing with the form of movies, and if you want to talk about like referencing history, that's referencing the history of film, right? That whole kind of like Saturday matinee, let's go to the lobby, get ourselves a snack. The show's over, come back for the next one, right?
Right, right. No, and I agree. I think it's funny that it ends that way. But I think it was at least in part because, and I should have written down this quote, but basically it was like we ended it that way because we couldn't think of anything else, and there's not the budget for something beyond that. But I think it worked out. It's one of those things like we were just talking about in our Jaws episode. Like the constraints end up pushing you in a direction that turns out to be the right one for the movie.
Well, Josh, you've always been a fan of the philosopher Goethe. And I know he was the one who always brought it up that the parameters of art are what make it so great.
Yeah, he was the seventh member of Monty Python, right?
Oh, Josh, you and your ribald humor.
Thank you. That's not ribald at all.
Well, did you boff or yuck at me just there, Josh?
I don't know. Let's say both. So, I mean, as a comedy fan, Jason, I assume you'd seen this at some point in the past.
You assume incorrectly, Josh. Yeah. So I actually have seen a lot more live stage Monty Python. You and I saw Spam-A-Lot together.
We did.
Which is based on this, obviously. And I saw Eric Idle and John Cleese do a two-man show where they kind of go over their singular histories and their Python histories, which was just awesome. Like one of the great two-man or any comedy shows I've ever seen. Wonderful show. But yeah, I never really watched the movies until we got here because I was busy trying to round up some nights for quests. So, but this was good. This gave me an excuse to watch all of them. Obviously, it's always nice to check off these blind spots.
Yeah. And so did you watch the Monty Python TV series back in the day?
Not like, like you said, it would always be on. So like I'd seen bits and pieces, but I never really focused on it. I'd seen maybe Life of Brian before, but that was when I was a teenager, and it just never got to me until now. And I watched all three of the movies in reverse: Meaning of Life, then Life is Brian, then Holy Grail.
Yeah, and I only watched this again this time, but I had seen all of that stuff, and I wasn't like a huge fan, but I definitely watched those movies. I think whether they were on TV, I remember renting Meaning of Life on like VHS from the video store specifically. The other stuff I may have just watched on TV on, Comedy Central or where whoever was airing these movies, and also the Monty Python sketch comedy show. But certainly, I think as a teenager, when I was watching stuff like The Kids in the Hall a lot, this was something that I also sought out and enjoyed very much. I always found Monty Python stuff hilarious. So it's something that, things like that you watch, especially comedy that you watch when you're younger, you wonder like, is this going to hold up? And I feel like this movie really does. That it's very funny, but it also does have this kind of intelligence behind it that you can recognize maybe more so if you come to it as an adult. So I was glad to see that. I'm sure I'd watched it sometime between when I was a teenager and now again, but it certainly had been a while.
Yeah, it's definitely smart. You're right there.
Yes. So Dave, this seems like it's right up your alley. You're always bringing up this kind of comedy sketch stuff. Were you a fan of this one growing up?
So I don't remember if I ever actually watched the movie or the movies in general from Monty Python. I just know I saw a bunch of Monty Python stuff as a teenager, and of course, like you said, I always loved sketch comedy, and so I loved all the sketch comedy troupes, including Monty Python. I just don't remember if I actually saw this particular movie, but I also enjoyed it.
So, Jason, anything else on the background of this film that you want to talk about?
I mean, it's fun to like after watching it, it is fun to read the plot summary on Wikipedia, because it's just like I said, it's just so chaotic, and it's like, and then this happens, but then this takes them away from that. Then they split up, and this guy goes here, but then they meet new knights, and they have to fight a rabbit together. But the rabbit kills three of them, so they throw a grenade into the cave, and the rest of them move on. I just wanted to bring up Neil Innes, Josh, who wrote that song that I had referenced there, and who had done a lot of other music for Monty Python over the years, and did the Ruddles with Eric Idle. I think his contribution is pretty immense to this. And I thought it was interesting because at first they let him soundtrack the whole thing, but they thought it was too accurate for the undercutting that they do. So that's why they picked like a lot of different stock music.
Right. And so what's left of his is the songs that they sing, which of course are great. And, you mentioned Spam a lot, and the fact that they have these catchy, entertaining songs here is the sort of wellspring of how they were able to turn this into a full-on stage musical. But it does make sense that I think, the music, like we were saying, that you hear at the very end over that black screen, and I'm guessing that's a Neil Innes music. And this is just this kind of jaunty, goofy music that maybe emphasizes the comedy too much. And so I would understand that they might want to pick some like serious sounding classical music instead, so that there's more contrast with the comedy.
Right. You're heightening the whole thing.
Yeah, indeed. So we'll come back then and talk more of our thoughts on Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1975, we are talking about the debut feature from Terry Jones and Terry Gilliam, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And, as a directorial debut, I wonder, like, do you feel like this is, we'll talk about this in the legacy, but of course, Gilliam in particular has had this long, distinguished directorial career. Does this seem like a launch point for what he does as a filmmaker?
I think so, because I think that, especially when we're talking about Gilliam, right? Like he's always working in that world of surreal and just kind of, as I mentioned, magic realism, just kind of, he is not afraid on, and we've talked about him before with Baron Munchausen,
Yeah.
which not a fan, but that's okay. But again, we're looking at like, big sets, historical style pieces. Not that that's all he's done, right? But just kind of world building, I guess, is what I'm looking for there. And I think, obviously they built this world, right? Mostly shot in Scotland, but I was never like, oh no, this doesn't feel like we're not in the in 932 AD, except when they wanted us to feel that way.
Right. And I think that's a key thing, is that they build that world effectively so that they can then undercut it, as we keep talking about, that you're immersed in it. And so it's funnier when all of a sudden here's this like historian hosting some sort of educational TV show or whatever, talking about it, and it's a modern looking guy with a microphone or whatever. And it's funnier then because it's more jarring, and this really plays with the whole format. It's very self-referential, and I think all that stuff works really well. And again, I think that's part of why the ending works, because you've set that up. You've set up the idea that here's this weird modern element that keeps intruding into the movie, and it intrudes so much there at the end that the movie has to stop.
Right. Like you were saying, they couldn't think of a better ending, but like, I'm like, hey man, the bits that you guys committed to, like, which is all of them, right? Like they saw them through, like the rabbit from beginning to end, right? And then on some of these other bits with like the modern historian, or like the questions about the swallow, the bird,
Yes.
they were able to use them like in really, really effective callbacks to elevate the movie even more.
Yeah, I think that's one of the great things about the comedy here, is that a lot of those things, they show up and you think it's a funny one-off bit. I mean, they could have easily just had that historian show up as a quick background gag and never shown him again. But there is a lot of cohesion to the comedy here, and all of those callbacks and the running gags that build, even some of the smaller, subtler ones. I loved the bit about King Arthur continually confusing 3 and 5 for some reason. And that's something that's just like a little joke when they have the holy hand grenade and he says to count to 5 and they're like, no, count to 3. And then later on, they're going to the bridge where the guardian of the bridge or whatever asks them 3 questions, and he keeps saying like, oh, go answer the 5 questions. No, 3 questions. And it's just, they're not calling attention to it, but it's just such a weird quirk of the character that comes up as a joke again.
And that obviously is the scene where they also call back the beginning bit where they're talking about what kind of swallow is flying and how it's flying and how it can migrate and everything. So that was fun. Also, the utilization of what they had, the obviously very famous idea of them just galloping and, their servants playing coconuts to make the horse noises, which, by the way, like that could have easily fallen flat, but man, did they commit to that,
It
right?
never gets old.
It doesn't. Biggest laugh, honestly. It's so funny.
It's just so, it is. It's just so wildly just like, what is happening here? And they only did that because they couldn't really afford horses to make the movie. So they're like, all right, we'll just use guys making coconut sounds and we'll all gallivant around like this.
Yeah, of course, it's always really funnier. And there's a great bit like toward the end, again, I think when they're going toward that bridge where they stop and King Arthur's like, oh, the horses are getting skittish. We better proceed on foot or whatever. And they all
dismount the horses, yes, right?
Exactly.
That's hilarious. Yeah. I like, I also do, we're talking about a singular point of view, but I think like, there is with Chapman, there's that like real serious commitment to the quest. And then meanwhile, you have Eric Idle, who's always just like so underwhelmed and wants no part of anything, including the songs that they sing about him as a knight, which are funny because, they're all, again, talking about how he's going to die or he's not as good as the other knights. So, right. But I just like Idle's flippishness. I do think you get the individual personalities, a lot of these people. Cleese, there's like a real strong machismo to him.
Yeah. And I mean, Cleese is good as Lancelot, but I think, we remember him more as the ridiculous French knight with his elaborate insults and his silly looking mustache.
Yeah, I think so too. And also I was reading, because in those scenes, they're like throwing livestock over the walls to like stop the British, to stop King Arthur. And that's based on truth, which is insane as well.
Yeah. And I think there's some smart, I guess in a way it's like weirdly, it is social commentary. I mean, there's a scene early in the film where King Arthur is riding past like the peasants and one of them is like, oh, he's the king. And the other says, well, how do you know he's the king? And it's like, oh, because he doesn't have any shit on him, which is funny in and of itself. But I thought it was great that there's this callback and it's not even really brought attention to it. But I feel like it's it's intentional, where toward the very end of the film, where they're at the final castle where they think the Holy Grail is, and the French people are there again to taunt them, and they dump shit on the king. And it's like, now is he no longer the king because he's got shit on him? I just thought that was a really clever thing that they're not, overemphasizing, but is definitely intentional.
Well, Josh, as you know, those other peasants would question if he was ever the king anyway, and what kind of society they were living in. Was it anarchistic, or was it was it a monarchy, and why? What makes him a king?
Right. The idea that strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no form of government, which is something I always think of, too, whenever I see a serious movie about King Arthur. I feel like the presentation of King Arthur in this film has ruined my ability to take the character seriously in any other format.
Yeah. So that you're saying that this movie ruined a kid in King Arthur's court for you?
Probably. I don't think I've seen that, but I definitely remember watching like the Guy Ritchie King Arthur movie, which is bad anyway, but also just thinking of Monty Python the whole time.
Yeah. But people love their monarchies, as we just referenced earlier.
They do. But again, of course, I feel like the coronation of King Charles could just, as it is, be a Monty Python sketch. Right. A lot of elements of it.
I agree with that.
So do you have another favorite bit from this film?
I think we mentioned a lot of them, honestly. I keep coming back to the song. I really like that song and the music throughout all their movies.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think the Always Look on the Bright Side of Life from Life of Brian is probably the most famous, or maybe the Lumberjack song from the TV show. But
the Galaxy song from Meaning of Life is also pretty famous. I'd say.
But maybe the songs from this, not quite as much. But of course, this is the one that ended up becoming a stage musical.
Right. But if I'm not mistaken, didn't Spamalot also include Bright Side of Life at the end of it there?
Oh, probably so. Yeah. I mean, like you said, we did go see it, but it was a long time ago. I don't remember all the details of that, but that makes sense. I feel like that's what they do with these kinds of things. They just kind of throw in any famous song. If it's a musical based on like a concept album or a band's particular thing, they just throw in whatever everyone remembers from it.
Dave, what about you? Did you have any favorites?
A lot of the ones you guys were mentioning. I did think it was funny when they rescue him from the all of the young girls, and he's going on about how perilous it was, how it wasn't really quite perilous. I thought that whole sequence was really funny.
Yeah, I do love it. And some very British things. I feel like I remember at the time as it, like when I was first watching it, and there's the whole bit where the knights who say they need a shrubbery. And that's not a term we have, I feel like, in the US. So it's like, what is a shrubbery? And it was sort of weirdly mysterious to me.
You know what shrubbery is. It's just a plant or some type of plant.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, and you can see in the movie what it is because they go get one and they bring it to them. But I feel like, I don't know.
They get two, actually.
Right. Yes, of course, because that's what's important. But I feel like that's not you wouldn't necessarily say like, oh, I'm going to plant a shrubbery outside my house. Maybe I just don't know. But
you could plant a shrub.
Yeah. I just feel like it sounds like a British term. I don't know. Maybe I'm just ignorant about gardening.
Which sounds like a shitty plant.
I mean, I think that's maybe part of the joke, that it's this sort of like very bland gardening feature that might be in front of not a fancy house or anything, that what they want is this very minor thing, but it involves this quest that the knights then have to go on.
Right. It's, get us a garden gnome or a pink flamingo for our lawn or something like that.
And of course, conveniently, they find the one person in the nearby village whose lifelong profession is arranging shrubberies.
Yeah. I do, talking about how they play with death, they're collecting, people in the Black Plague, right? And just dumping them on top of each other. And they're like, can you take this guy? He's dead. And, he's just on top of Eric Idle's shoulder. I think the guy's like, no, I'm not dead. And he goes, yeah, but you will be soon. And they have like a bargaining to see if they can take the guy because they say he's going to die. But the guy's like, I'm feeling better. It was a funny interchange there.
Yeah. And I feel like that's another running gag where there's multiple instances of people who are injured or near death and protest that they're not dead yet. There's the scene where Lancelot goes to that castle and is going to rescue what he thinks is a fair maiden who doesn't want to get married, but is really the sort of I don't know, sissy, I guess what they call him.
Effeminate son.
Yeah, the effeminate son, exactly. And he just goes and murders everyone in that castle. And
Right.
and there is someone who the king then says he's going to adopt, the princess who he was trying to marry off to his son because her parents are dead, and her father's like, no, I'm not dead. And again, it's this moment where they need the person to be dead for like the plot to move along, and so the characters have to insist, no, you are dead, or you're about to be dead.
Yeah, I think that one of the more famous versions of that is the duel between the Black Knight and King Arthur, where King Arthur chops off each limb of his until like he's literally limbless, and he's like, oh, you're running away, you coward, we'll just call it a draw.
Yeah, it's just a flesh wound or whatever. And
I think everyone's seen that sequence, even if you haven't seen this movie.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and there's so many things in this movie that are just like lines that people quote. I feel like you maybe have heard someone saying this as a reference or just as a response to something. Even if you've not only not seen the movie, but maybe not even seen the clip of that scene, but just the references that people might not even realize are from this, just because people like they've become part of this pop culture lexicon. And I think those are key elements there. I know certainly as a kid, and this is one of these also weird misconceptions. Like I had this friend who I'm sure we would quote various Monty Python things, and he would always quote this insult, calling someone a son of a motherless goat. And I just assumed, I was watching this movie, I was like, oh, that's something that one of the French guys says in this film. But it's not. It's from Three Amigos, which I've not seen. So, it all kind of meshes together.
All right. Well, I don't have anything else after your Three Amigos reference.
Yeah, that's some real obscure stuff from my childhood there. That's I recalled. But should we give this one a rating then?
Sure, out of 5 killer bunnies.
Why not? I was going to say 5 shrubberies, but any of these references will work.
I give it 3.5. Enjoyable. Happy to watch it again.
Yeah, I agree. 3.5. I mean, that's it is very funny though, and I think it holds up. It's it's scattered, it's episodic, but that's by nature. But still, if you haven't seen this for some reason, it's a classic for a good reason and worth checking out. So, Dave, how would you rate this?
Also going 3.5.
All right.
It's funny.
Definitely. Yes, it is funny. I mean, it's also the kind of thing where, comedy is very subjective, but it's also the kind of thing where if you watch the first like 5 minutes of this movie and you don't laugh, then it's not for you. You'll turn it off. But if you're laughing from the start, then this movie will be very, very enjoyable for you to watch. So we'll come back then and talk about the legacy of Monty Python and the Holy Grail. Welcome back to Awesome Movie Year. In this episode of our season on the films of 1975, we are talking about the debut feature from Terry Gilliam and Terry Jones as directors, Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And in terms of a directorial debut, we did, of course, as Jason said, we talked about Terry Gilliam's career a lot when we did our episode on the adventures of Baron Munchausen. And he's the one who, as a director, went on to this really amazing career with a lot of excellent films, hugely influential, especially in that arena, like Jason was saying, of this kind of surreal, magical realist stuff. I do enjoy Baron Munchausen, as we talked about in that episode. I love 12 Monkeys, Brazil, Time Bandits is another thing from my childhood that was very influential. And do you have a favorite Terry Gilliam film, Jason?
Well, yeah, I mean, I would honestly, I've missed a good amount of them, but I want to rewatch a lot of them. I guess 12 Monkeys right now is probably my favorite, but maybe even more than that is the documentary Lost in La Mancha about how we probably talked about that on the Baron Munchausen episode, about how he was trying to make Don Quixote as a movie and just all the kind of obstacles he had to overcome to get there. And then that was before he actually made the movie. Then he did make the movie, and then it kind of deflated.
Yeah, it's not that great. That's his most recent film, The Man Who Killed Don Quixote, which is, it's okay, but it's definitely not. I feel like there's no way it would have been as good as the buildup over the like 20-year period of him attempting to get it made and all these spectacular failures. And he's also had this narrative throughout his career of being sort of quixotic as a filmmaker and having all of these unrealized projects and these grand ambitions that he can't make come together.
Yeah, we've talked about a lot of filmmakers like that where, that would have been interesting, but it just doesn't work out.
Right.
So your favorite is 12 Monkeys also, Josh?
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, I've seen a lot, but I would probably want to revisit. Like Time Bandits, for example, is something that I remember just being mesmerized by when I was probably 11 or 12 years old, but I don't think I've seen it since then. So I'd love to check it out again.
Yeah, I know Fisher King has such a great reputation, and I think Fear and Loathing in Las Vegas deserves another rewatch. It's been a long time for me.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's always interesting, even when the movies aren't great. I mean, I do like the Brothers Grimm, which was notoriously messed with by the Weinsteins. I think is still fun to watch, or Tideland, which is incredibly dark, and I think is too much for some people. But I mean, even when the movies don't turn out to be as successful as they are in theory, I think he's always worth watching.
Oh yeah, it's definitely an interesting film.
Yeah, and he's still trying to get projects going, and hopefully he'll manage to do something else at one point. As a director, Terry Jones, not necessarily as big a career. He did direct on his own the next two Monty Python films, The Life of Brian and The Meaning of Life. Gilliam is not credited as director on those. And he has directed a handful of other films. I've never seen anything else he directed, I think, outside of Monty Python. Did you ever see Eric the Viking, Jason? I feel like that was another kind of cultish comedy back in the 80s.
No, I'd be interested though. And he was an early writer on Labyrinth. So, again, playing in this fantastical world.
Yeah. And I feel like a lot of these Monty Python people, they're so talented in so many ways. He's had this career which has gone in a million different directions, as a film director, as a TV writer, as a novelist, a poet, directing things on the stage. He did a lot of this documentary work on TV in history documentaries. I mean, these guys are just so incredibly intelligent in so many different realms, not just like goofy sketch comedy.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I mean, I think that calling it goofy sketch comedy underrates what they actually did.
Right. No, and I think you're right that it is, you can see a lot of that cleverness demonstrated in the sketch comedy, but you can also just appreciate it for its goofiness.
Right. Fair enough.
Yeah. So Graham Chapman, who, as we said, is the lead here, the closest to the lead that we have as King Arthur, sadly passed away very young. He died in 1989 and seemed like he was having maybe a spotty career post Python, more so than some of the other ones. I'm not familiar with any of the like film roles and things that he had after Monty Python, including Yellowbeard and The Odd Job, which were both movies that he played the lead in. And then, yeah, he passed away at age 48. So something that whenever the Monty Python guys have their various reunions that they've had periodically over the years, are always paying tribute to him. And, sad that he went so young.
Yeah, I agree. But I think like all these guys, he would have found, a lot of work as a voice actor or a character actor going forward.
Right. Yeah. And I mean, and I feel like probably those misfire movies that all of these guys have made are, I'm sure, all interesting to watch. Just like Terry Gilliam's directorial films, like they're probably all interesting to watch, even if they don't fully come together.
Yeah, I mean, they take big shots, right? And you got to respect that.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, of the Monty Python guys, I think John Cleese is the one who went on to become the biggest, like, celebrity, I think, especially, as an actor and as a comedy star. I mean, he did Fawlty Towers, which is a hugely influential British sitcom. He wrote and starred in A Fish Called Wanda and Fierce Creatures. And just as an actor is in a million different things, all the, ranging from silly like family comedies to playing Q in a couple of the James Bond movies, and is still out there in all sorts of random stuff.
He's in so many things coming up. And again, he's one of these guys who has found a lot of, supporting work, voice acting work. And for Fish Called Wanda, he had a Best Original Screenplay nomination at the Oscars.
I remember not liking A Fish Called Wanda. Have you seen that?
I mean, again, it's a rewatch at this point, right?
Right.
Because I don't remember it. I might have seen it, but I was probably too young to appreciate it, or maybe I didn't see it.
Yeah,
I mean,
I think it was something that I came to maybe as a teenager or something like that, but having known it was from John Cleese and having enjoyed all these Monty Python shows and movies, and I think I just like didn't laugh at it once. So it would be worth checking out again.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah. for whatever year that is. We'll get that on Awesome Movie Year. Um, Eric Idle, along with John Cleese, I think is the most famous face from the Monty Python troupe. You mentioned the Ruddles, his parody of the Beatles that he created and that had kind of gone on to its own little life. And he worked as a songwriter as well, in addition to Spam-A-Lot, which is probably the most famous musical thing that he's done. He's got a lot of different songwriting credits. And Spam-A-Lot itself is supposed to be adapted into a movie, which I'm very skeptical of that. I don't know how you feel about that prospect of that.
I mean, let's give it a shot. Actually, when you're talking about movies that like just died right away, he I think he wrote and starred in Splitting Heirs, and that's supposed to be a notoriously bad movie. So it would be interesting to watch that. But he does have a Drama Desk Award, a Grammy Award, and Spam-A-Lot has, won a ton of Tonys, Best Musical, Best Direction for Mike Nichols, who we've talked about on here before, and Best Performance by a Featured Actress for Sarah Ramirez.
Yeah, and I remember enjoying it when we went to see it on stage. I think, because it's Vegas, we probably saw a slightly truncated version, but it was definitely fun.
It was a lot of fun. And I remember, I think they gave out like the big, or they sold that merch where, stuffed killer bunnies was one of their big toys they worked with.
Yeah, but I just am, I think about the movie version of the Producers stage musical, and that's in my mind how these kind of movie to musical to movie again adaptations often go.
That would be bad.
That would be bad. Although I will say I enjoyed like Matilda the musical that was recently in that trajectory.
That was fun.
Yeah, it was. And finally, Michael Palin, the last of these Monty Python guys to mention here. He really has not been
Sir Michael Palin.
Is he the only one who is a sir? I feel like they should all be.
I think they offered it to John Cleese and he turned it down.
Well, that's actually probably smart. Good for him for having a principle on that. But yeah, Michael Palin, less of a comedy actor than these other guys. He's made a whole career of these travel documentaries and educational documentaries that he's done for many decades, and is occasionally acting and stuff, but really I think better known for that's the documentary work.
Yeah, I think the last big movie he was in was Death of Stalin, but and he might have won a BAFTA for A Fish Called Wanda as supporting actor. But if you look up his documentaries, it's so cool. Like he travels all over the world. They all have a theme, whether it's like paradise or going into Baghdad, war zones or the Arctic, whatever it is. Like they all have these themes, and he seems to write travelogue books to coincide with all of these releases. So a very cool career for him.
Yeah. Have you seen any of those documentaries?
No.
Okay. Well, it seems like your kind of thing. So I thought
I would watch it. Yeah, it sounds nice.
Yeah. So, I mean, another influence I feel like here is that because this is so early, like it's something that we are used to now is these sketch comedy troupes that make movies, whether it's movies based on SNL sketches that we talked about, like with our episode on the Blues Brothers, which launched that. But of course, that was 5 years after this. And groups like The Kids in the Hall and The State and Broken Lizard, who I know, Jason, you're a big fan of, and like The Whitest Kids You Know, even. And coming up to Please Don't Destroy, who have a movie that they are working on right now. And I feel like all of this kind of originates with this movie.
I think you're right. And it's always interesting to see like what works and what doesn't work. I just watched Quasi, the latest Broken Lizard one, and I think it doesn't work, but they owe a lot of debt to this film.
Yeah. And I think another thing that, like I was talking about, you can tell, these comedy troupes are often like rock bands, they're began before these people are famous, when they're just friends or they're in the same college or just in the same improv troupe or whatever. And you can tell the camaraderie and like, The Kids in the Hall, for example, when you watch that movie Brain Candy, where they were all fighting with each other, like you can tell that it just doesn't come together because they don't have that hive mind that we were talking about.
Well, yeah, I saw something recently, we talked about the 10 and the State, and we all love the State. And they were like, before the TRL studio was the TRL studio, that was their office when they were like 22 to 24, just working at MTV. And it's like, it's very heady if you're just out of college and you're, living such a life.
Right. And like rock bands, they're sort of tied to each other all the time. We talk about these Monty Python reunions, and these guys, the ones who are still alive, they're like in their 80s now, and they're still, expected to have these little reunions and collaborations.
Why not?
Yeah.
Go for it.
So Dave, I know this is kind of your area. Do you have any other favorite like sketch comedy troupe movies or anything you wanted to mention?
I mean, you nailed all of like the big ones that have gone on to do these things. I mean, yeah, the State obviously all getting together to do Wet Hot, and then the 10, and then all the SNL movies that we probably talked about while doing the Wayne's World episode. Yeah, I mean, these are definitely the things that I love. These kinds of like sketches turned movies that are just totally stupid and ridiculous and funny.
Right. And even
Super Troopers is
Yeah.
the one I would add to that list.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, I'm sort of lukewarm on Broken Lizard. I wanted to mention a movie that I watched recently from a sketch troupe called The Vacationeers, who I'm not familiar with their sketches at all, and they're not like famous as a sketch troupe, but they made a couple movies, including It's a Disaster, which is kind of blends them with more famous people like David Cross and Julia Stiles, which is a really fun Black comedy about the end of the world that I think is kind of underrated, and I would recommend checking out.
I like that movie.
Yeah.
I watched that one.
It's a good one. So yeah, and I think Dave also like the parody type movies that aren't from sketch comedy troupes, but things like Kentucky Fried Movie that we did an episode on, and like the all the Zucker Brothers stuff that comes from this too.
Yeah, absolutely. I would also throw in Tenacious D and The Pick of Destiny, which I love so much, and comes from all the Tenacious D stuff.
Yeah. So anything else on the legacy of Monty Python you want to talk about, Jason?
It's good.
It is good, yes. So we're off to a good start here for this season. 2 classic films that we liked. Because sometimes we talk about these classic films and they don't work for us. But that was not the case here. We like these movies, and that's nice. So,
well, we might ruin it with our next one there, Josh.
We'll see. So that is Monty Python and the Holy Grail. And that is this episode of Awesome Movie Year. You can say "nee" to us online and on social media.
Can we hear it in a high voice though, Josh?
Say "nee" like that.
There you go.
That was too high pitched, I think.
I think you need a little more authority to it.
Yeah, I don't have any authority on it.
All right. Well, we're on social media, awesomemovieyear.com, Awesome Movie Year on Facebook and Instagram, Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter. I'm Jason Harris Comedy, or Jay Harris Comedy on all the socials. Go for Jason, of course, has been cut up by King Arthur. He's just sliced off all its limbs. But Eat This Comedy is still out there on Instagram and as a website. And Josh, go for Jason, Letterboxd. Let's just do that.
Yeah, check us out on Letterboxd, definitely. So my website also cut off at the knees in various other places, but still a lot of old stuff there at joshbellhateseverything.com. You can also check out Josh Bell Hates Everything on Facebook, and at Signal Bleed on Twitter, and at Signal Bleed on Letterboxd, where, might be the most active place, really. And listen to our producer, David Rosen's awesome podcast, Piecing It Together.
Check out Piecing It Together wherever you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media at Piecing Pod, and join our Facebook group, Popcorn and Puzzle Pieces,
where you can quote some Monty Python jokes to us.
Yeah,
you
that'd
can
be
do
fun.
all those things.
Yeah. So, Jason, what is in our next episode?
Josh, we are going to the bomb, the box office flop of 1975. Ken Russell, very prolific this year, and this film is called Lisztomania.
Yeah, I haven't seen that. Very curious to see how that goes. So tune in next time for Lisztomania, and thanks for listening to Awesome Movie Year.
Thank you for listening to Awesome Movie Year. Make sure to follow Awesome Movie Year on Facebook, at Awesome Movie Pod on Twitter, and at Awesome Movie Year on Instagram. And if you like the show, review us and rate us with 5 stars on Apple Podcasts.
An All Points West production, produced by David Rosen in Las Vegas.